Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about some more complex types of thesis statements. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the Greek philosopher Aristotle as the subject of the thesis. Aristotle is going to be the data of this new thesis. Now, the point that I want to make here is that I don't mean Aristotle the person. Okay, the implied idea is that Aristotle's works, okay, everything that he accomplished, everything that he did in his life, okay. So when I say Aristotle, I don't mean the person. I actually mean all of the material, all of the stuff that he did throughout his life. And trust me, there's a lot of it. So, looking at that, let's say that I want to put this thesis statement out there in the world. I want to say this. Aristotle was the greatest thinker of all time. Okay? Now, going back, just to remind you, going back to the constituent parts of the thesis, Aristotle here, that's going to be our data. Okay? That's the thing that we're looking at. And like I said, I mean all of his work. Okay? All of his books, all of his ideas. So if I say Aristotle was the greatest thinker. Now here, okay, this is my claim. Okay? Greatest thinker. Now why is that a claim versus an observation? If I said Aristotle was a genius. Now, if you've read Aristotle, it is very, very clear that he was a genius. I mean, he is incredibly prolific. He wrote on every conceivable subject that was available to him at the time. He is, in fact, the reason why we bracket our university system into majors. He actually created all of those designations. So if you're studying physics, if you're studying astrophysics, if you're studying biology, if you're studying rhetoric, if you're studying logic, he is the one who actually broke down and gave us the categories by which we understand all of those university majors even today. And Aristotle lived about 2,400 years ago. Okay, so Aristotle was a genius. Well, you know, that's just an observation. That's clear as day by looking at all of the work that he did. So once again, this is an observation. We can't use this one. Okay, so I got it. Let's erase this. Okay, now here's our data. Here's our claim. Now, you might not believe me. You might say, okay, well, I think that Isaac Newton was the greatest thinker of all time. I think it was Einstein. So when we have a debate, we know that we have a pretty good thesis statement because it's always something that we can put out there in debate. So now I've got to try to convince you that Aristotle was the greatest thinker of all time. So I'm going to generate my set of topics. Okay, here are my topics. Sorry, it's kind of hard to write with this thing. So here's my set of topics. Okay, what if I said Aristotle was the greatest thinker of all time? Remember, because he was, let's say, because he spoke Greek, and we all know Greek is actually a really hard language to learn. If you ever go and study Greek, I think it's far more difficult to learn than any of the other languages I've ever learned. So he spoke Greek. Let's say this. He invented categories of knowledge we still use today. Okay? Now that's an observation, that's just true. So he invented categories of knowledge we still use today. And let's say this. He was Plato's best student. So here are my topics. Okay, Aristotle was the greatest thinker of all time because he spoke Greek, because he invented categories of knowledge we still use today, and because he was Plato's best student. Now let's see whether these actually will work. Okay. Now here's our data. Here's our claim. Here's our topic. Did Aristotle speak Greek? Is this true of the data? This is what I want you to see in this more complex version of the thesis statement. The topics must be true of the data. If they are not, they're unusable. Okay, because they first of all must support the data factually or directly. Okay, the topics must be plausibly true of the claim. Now this is what I want you to see. Does speaking Greek make you the greatest thinker of all time? Of course not. It doesn't. There's no way that it could. Okay, so speaking Greek doesn't make you smart or dumb or anything. Okay, it just means that you speak Greek. So that one is an unusable topic because while it supports my data, it does not even remotely connect to my claim. Now, let's look at our second topic. Did Aristotle invent categories of knowledge that we still use today? Yes, that's true of my data. Okay. Now, is that plausibly true of the claim? If you invent something, if you invent categories of knowledge that are in use for 2,500 years, I think that's at least plausibly related to greatest thinker. Okay. Now, like I said, there's no true or false answer to any thesis statement. True and false are not categories that we want to use when we're looking at claims. Okay. We only want true false in relationship to our data and our topic sets. Okay. So, was Aristotle Plato's best student? Now, you might not know this, but yes, by far. Aristotle was the student of Plato. Plato was the student of Socrates. And if you ever need to remember this, here's the mnemonic: SPA, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Anyway, Aristotle was Plato's best student. That's true. Now, does being Plato's best student plausibly relate to my claim? Now, this is where it gets kind of complex, and this is what I want you to see in the distinctions that we use for our thesis statements. Okay? These are what we would call our warrant topics, okay? Because they're kind of the main topics. Now, sometimes a warrant topic isn't fully fleshed out, okay? So in that sense, we would need a backing topic, okay? So here, let's make our backing topic something like this. Plato's influence is still the greatest among Western philosophy. Okay, so I'm going to modify this. I'm going to modify this a little bit. So my backing topic is simply seeking to kind of reconnect my warrant topic back to my claim. Okay, so if you're the best student of the most influential Western philosopher, right, that might connect it. That what I want you to see is that this topic is weaker. This topic is great. This topic will work perfectly. Okay, this topic, well, you see, I'm having to add a lot of words. I'm really having to put a lot of effort into making this connect. It's still very weak. So what I want you to see is that this thesis model gives you a very, very clear kind of skeleton by which you can outline your thesis statement, your general idea, very, very quickly before you even start writing. And what this is going to do is going to save you a lot of time, okay, going forward, because you're not going to be writing things about how complex the Greek language is and whatever. You know, those topics are irrelevant. So you're not going to be wasting time doing research or writing on them when you don't need to. Now, here is the thesis model kind of pared down to its skeleton. Okay, data sub 1, Aristotle. Okay, I'm just going to use the previous example. Aristotle, greatest thinker of all time. Okay, how and why. The moment you have your main thesis, the questions you should start asking are how and why. How is Aristotle the greatest thinker? Why do I think he is the greatest thinker? Okay, that generates your topic list. Okay, he invented systems of thought and thought that we still use today. I'm going to add one here. He invented formal logic, which was used almost uninterruptedly for nearly 2,000 years. And he was Plato's best student, Plato being the greatest thinker, or the most influential philosopher of all time. Okay, so now you can start to see how this skeleton, it almost starts to look like math. And this is what I want you to start using for all of your thesis statements, for this class, for any paper you're ever going to write. This will save you a lot of time, because very, very quickly you can start looking at how these function. Okay, you can start to map it out. You can say, did Aristotle invent systems of thought that we use today? Yes. Did Aristotle invent logic? Yes. Was Aristotle Plato's best student? Yes. Plato was the most influential philosopher of all time, at least in the West. Now, these now then start to plausibly relate to my claim. You see how this whole structure, okay, is the map, is the framework, is the skeleton of any idea that you're ever going to have. Okay, so during class I will start to really point to these aspects of your thesis statements, because I want them to look exactly like this. I want them to have clear data points. I want the claim to be interesting and engaging, and I want all of the topics that you provide to fully connect, okay, to the data factually and plausibly connect to the claim. If your thesis statements do not have these parts, they are incomplete, and they will be basically unusable for the papers that we're going to write for this class. In the next video, I'm going to talk about a new, or just basically a different idea, a different thesis statement. It's going to be a little bit more complex, okay, but it will still have all of these same parts. These parts will never change inside of a thesis statement.